In this Dragon Age The Veilguard video, we're going to be talking about the 22 minutes of gameplay that was shown recently on the IGN channel with commentary from the developers. Kind of walked us through some of the gameplay features of the game. In this video, I kind of want to talk about what those are, what we learned from that video, and just kind of give you an update on things that we now know about the game. So the first thing of note is that from what we can tell from the gameplay features and from what's shown, it looks like the footage is from the middle of the game, not the beginning. And we are going to try and omit any major spoilers in this footage. So if you're worried about that, you don't need to worry too much. We will show some basic locations and things like that and talk about some characters, but we're not going to get into like the whole plot of the game and, massive spoilers or anything like that. So the first thing that we're taking a look at here is the Lighthouse. It's got a lot of detail, and this location is mentioned to be your base of operations where you can prep your gear and set your inventory and tinker around with your characters and companions, etc. before heading out to explore the game world. And if you've ever played Dragon Age in any form, you basically know that this is to be expected. Basically, every Dragon Age game has had an area where you have like a home base and you can upgrade it and talk to NPCs there and your companions. So this looks to be that for this game. And then the next location shown is called the Crossroads, and this is another very important location, and it seems to be the main waypoint for traveling between different areas. It looks like that you'll be able to fast travel to areas that you've already visited, so you won't have to trek through the Crossroads every time, but there is fast travel in the game, and it does seem like it's handled from this area. So moving on to some of the characters that we see in this gameplay, obviously you can tell in this gameplay footage that Rook is a Kunari, the horns are a dead giveaway, and you can customize your own Rook and choose your race, so obviously if you don't want to be Kunari, that's fine, you can make your Rook however you want. And the next thing you're going to notice before we get on to some more characters is that quest markers are visible in the overworld, not just on the minimap, which is really handy for trying to find the location that you're trying to get to. If you're not someone who typically uses the minimap or is bad at reading minimaps, being able to see that on the overworld map is a huge help. So from there, we see a quest that triggers a cutscene where you meet Davrin and a griffin named Assam. Yes, you can pet Assam, which is clearly the most important feature depending on who you ask. And the voice acting is actually pretty good here, but I couldn't help noticing that everyone looks like they've been using top-tier skincare products. Their faces are just so smooth, they make butter look rough. The way their mouths move also feels a bit off, giving me Mass Effect Andromeda flashbacks, which is not great to say the least if you've ever played that game. The 5 of you out there that have. The devs also mentioned that certain characters appreciate different dialogue approaches, which likely ties to the relationship system. If you played Dragon Age before, this should be pretty standard, but we do see in the action that Davrin responds positively to a direct dialogue choice, which means that, even direct dialogue can have a positive effect on characters. It's also helpful that each dialogue option comes with an icon showing its tone. Direct dialogue is represented by a guy with crossed arms, while other tones include a thumbs up for friendliness, a head with a question mark for confusion, and some branching arrows that I think means that the dialogue opens up with more dialogue options, I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that. Moving on from there, it seems like you'll have a pet companion during exploration, though it's unclear if you can choose from multiple pets. There might just be one, but we don't really know. Traveling to new areas is straightforward. In this case, you ride a floating boat to your destination. You won't get to walk from point A to point B to reach different towns, since this isn't an open world game. From there, we head into combat. You've got 2 companions with you. This shouldn't be new to you if you saw earlier gameplay, and the combat looks pretty fluid in my opinion. The gameplay footage features a mage, and dodging and positioning are crucial when enemies swarm you, because you're a mage. Otherwise, you'll just get overwhelmed quickly. Selecting skills pauses the action so you can survey the battlefield, but it also reveals enemies' weaknesses and their resistances, so you're going to want to use it a lot of times just for that. But this is honestly one of my favorite features just looking at the combat so far, because I'm somebody who appreciates turn-based games, and honestly, I love the old school games like Knights of the Old Republic, and I love games like Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, where you had real-time with pause, and even though it was real time, because you could pause it, it kind of gave you this pseudo turn-based feeling to it, and it allows you time to think. I'm somebody that doesn't have the greatest reflexes, but I like to be strategic. I like strategic combat. I like strategic games. And when you can freeze time and make a strategic decision, and you can do that repeatedly in combat, I think that makes it more interesting. So I'm really, really looking forward to this, and it's one of the best features I think so far of combat in general. And because you can see the enemy weaknesses and resistances when you go in to use a skill and you can look around, It's really convenient because you don't have to just like trial and error on to see what, an enemy or a boss is weak to with multiple damage types like you might have to do in something like a Souls game before we have the wiki filled out with all the information where you're just like, let me see what damage works. Here you can see what it is and just use that right away to be effective. Another thing is that you can also initiate skill combos with your companions, with the game showing you which skills work well together. So you can kind of get an idea of which ones are going to be good with your companions. And this feature adds a nice layer of strategy, and it allows you to customize your playstyle. Maybe you're someone who likes to hang back and hit enemies with ranged attacks like me, while they're distracted by your companions who prefer to fight that are up close. Or maybe you're the type to bring the fight to the enemies while relying on your companions to make sure you won't get flanked by lesser mobs. These things are doable in Dragon Age The Veilguard, and I can't wait to see more about that. So after the combat segment, we arrive at a settlement, which seems to be one of the multiple hubs from Dragon Age The Veilguard, where you can buy and sell equipment, pick up quests, talk to NPCs, learn about the game world. If you've played Dragon Age, this should not be a big surprise. But something that I noticed here is that you can actually upgrade shops, and when you upgrade them, their inventory increases or changes, which is a nice touch. So that's something that you'll be focusing on throughout the game to get better and better equipment, I assume. And something that was emphasized by the devs here is that side quests are worth your time. Even if you're a main story focused type of person, a lot of people like to do the side quests for experience or for loot, but they're also supposed to be narratively relevant, meaning that, even if they don't have a large impact on the main story at large, it's possible they give you some background on locations, events, or characters that make you maybe understand the main plot line a bit better. So definitely check those out. We then jump into another combat segment after this part, and this time it's against enemies that drop from the ceiling and explode, which is definitely an ARPG classic. And for some reason, you almost always fight these enemy types in narrow corridors. In a wider area, I noticed that the companion AI is actually pretty reliable in combat, which is not something I was expecting. And healing spells are back, and you can ask your companions to heal you quickly. The devs mentioned that the companions' AI is actually based on their in-game personalities, which is reflected in their skills, including healing. So this is going to be something that's interesting because the companions are not only going to act the way they act outside of combat, but this is going to influence how they act inside of combat, which should make things a little bit more immersive, right? Like if you have a reckless, headstrong character, when they go into combat and they just charge in, it would make sense. But if they were hanging back and they were really cautious, it wouldn't really make much sense. So I'm curious to see how that plays throughout the game. And one thing I really liked during the combat is how enemies really position themselves to surround you. If you dodge an attack, you might find yourself in front of another enemy. So you really have to stay aware of your surroundings, and it's not just as simple as one enemy attacks you, then the next enemy attacks you, etc. And there are strategies to positioning and environment when tackling enemies as well, like picking off ranged enemies before engaging tougher foes. And enemies also take fall damage, so if you knock them off platforms, they're going to take a lot of damage. And you can perform takedowns when their health is low, which are like finishing moves, which is really nice. The devs also mentioned that the mage they used in this footage is a more melee-focused version of a mage. It's an agile version who uses necromancy for lifesteal. There are obviously various builds for each class, including one focused entirely on takedowns, which sounds really exciting, honestly. I can't wait to try that out. As we progress further, we trigger another cutscene with Davrin, where you can choose a dialogue option to improve his relationship level. Combat then resumes, and this time it's a tight space with a lot of enemies. The devs emphasize that party setup is entirely up to you. If you want a party full of mages, you can go for it. But mixing classes can highlight how well they synergize, so there's a lot to consider when planning your quests, builds, party roles, etc., more than you would just, typically think of. During the combat, there are these red, bulging circular objects on the ground called blight boils that need to be destroyed to stop enemy spawns. It adds a mini objective during fights, which keeps things interesting, but can also be kind of annoying depending on how much it's used throughout the game. I hope this is used sparingly because I don't want to have to just charge to these every time I see enemies. Otherwise, I get overwhelmed. There was another cool moment where one of the enemies, a grenader, literally rips off one of his body parts and throws it at you as a weapon. I thought that was really cool. And another cool feature is the option to revive on the spot when you die, which helps avoid losing progress, especially after a tough battle. But of course, this will have limited uses because if you could use it all the time, there wouldn't really be any difficulty to the game. Think of something like God of War, where maybe you have one per checkpoint, something like that. Visually, Dragon Age The Veilguard is kind of a mixed bag. The environments actually look really good. The mood, the setting of them look great. But my only gripe is with characters, really. The textures, they seem a bit off. I won't get into Rook's 5-head since that's clearly player created, but the overly smooth, unblemished faces and how the mouths move are a bit unsettling. Combat-wise, though, I was initially skeptical, especially when they announced you wouldn't be able to switch between companions, but after seeing the footage, I don't think it's going to be a huge issue. You can command companions seamlessly, and the skill combinations are obviously a huge plus, because you can kind of command them incidentally through using your own skills, which is nice. And you can mix and match to get out of tight spots, which, encourages strategic thinking rather than just rushing into combat. Customization is another strong point of Dragon Age The Veilguard, allowing you to tweak your equipment, builds, skills, and even upgrade shops, giving you a solid sense of progression. This has always been a huge part of Dragon Age, and I can't wait to see how it is in this game. It's a shame they didn't show the skill points or skill trees, as that's something I was really looking forward to, but they have shown this in previous footage on the Dragon Age channel, so I can show you some of it here, even though it wasn't shown in this footage. As for traversal and exploration, it's pretty standard for an ARPG or a role-playing game. Nothing groundbreaking, but it gets the job done. I do appreciate that the side quests are tied to the main story, rather than feeling completely disconnected. That can be the case in a lot of games, so hopefully that pans out nicely. It can get really silly sometimes when you're knee-deep in a main quest line, 20 hours into a game, getting serious, things are getting crazy, and someone comes up and asks you to go bring them their cheese or something, you know what I mean? Like, that's a bit of a ridiculous over-exaggeration, but you know what I mean. Sometimes you can get these side quests that just come out of the blue for a side quest's sake. It'd be nice that they're related to the main narrative. Overall, I think the gameplay footage was more of a positive than a negative, especially the combat, which is definitely the highlight of the game for me. I think I'm really going to enjoy the combat of this game. The game releases on October 31st, Halloween, which is not too far away. I'm sure we'll see more footage of this game between now and then. In fact, I can pretty much guarantee it, especially on this channel. So that's all we've got for now for Dragon Age The Veilguard, but I want to know what you guys make of it so far. I know everyone's very skeptical of this game. I'm still skeptical, but what do you make now? Are you less skeptical? Are you more optimistic? Or are you less optimistic? Let me know in the comments below.